Before the break, we saw what those who violated human rights stand to gain from the Truth Commission process. But certainly those who survived these violations and the families of those who did not are more important. The new democratic government, actually we as a nation, has a moral responsibility to provide reparation to those victims of human rights abuses. After all, it is through their suffering that we gained our freedom.
With the birth of the Truth Commission last year, a voice was finally given to the thousands of South Africans who had been brutalized during the conflict of the apartheid years. For months, people from every part of the country poured their hearts out before the TRC's human rights violations hearings. They told harrowing tales of pain, suffering, loss, murder, torture. But they also asked the Truth Commission for simple things to fill the cracks left by the past. From spectacles to wheelchairs, tombstones to street names, help with medical bills, and the truth about what had happened to their loved ones.
Victims came in their hundreds to open their souls to the TRC. And I believe that we have then a responsibility as the TRC not to let those who opened their souls to us down.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Port Elizabeth.
We've just touched down here in the Eastern Cape, where the Truth Commission held its first human rights violations hearings in April last year. The Special Report team hopes to speak to some of the first victims who told their stories to the nation and the world. Like you, we also want to know what the Truth Commission has done for them in the past 18 months. Ernest Singapwana Malgas, a former executive member of PEPCO, the Port Elizabeth Black Civic Organisation, appeared at the TRC's first hearing in East London to relate his painful story of torture at the hands of the police.
If you are able to,
the Malgas couple have clearly had many high expectations of the Truth Commission. They say they're grateful to the Commission for providing them with a new wheelchair, but claim that there are many promises the TRC did not honour.
They promise us everything. They promise us a medical assistant. They promise us to help us with our financial something like electricity, rent, and other things. And they promise us that they are going to look after our children, more special, something like education. But they didn't do anything about those promises. After we came from the Truth Commission, my husband get worse and worse. He wasn't like this when we went to the Truth Commission last year. But after they disappoint him, he was getting worse and worse.
Elizabeth Harshe also testified at the first hearing.
I'm really frustrated about my situation. I don't want to cry. Really, I don't want to cry, but I would like the Commission to help me.
Her husband, Sipho, was one of the PEPCO 3 who were abducted and murdered by the notorious Eastern Cape Security Police in May 1985. Their bodies were then thrown into the Fish River. Mrs. Harshe says if it had not been for the Truth and Reconciliation process, she may never have discovered the one thing she'd wanted most, finally knowing what had happened to her husband's remains.
I wanted the truth. Now I've heard the truth. I'm so happy. Look at me today, because I heard what happened to him, and I know he was fighting for the people of South Africa. He wanted to free the people in South Africa because we were oppressed.
There are many who say that the government has a special obligation to look after the families of activists and victims like Ernest Malgas and Sipho Harshe, who fought for the liberation of this country. But the TRC's Reparation and Rehabilitation Committee says the state has a moral obligation to compensate each and every South African who qualifies as a victim of a gross human rights violation. While human rights violations and amnesty hearings dominated the headlines in the past year and a half, the Reparation and Rehabilitation Committee has been putting together its final recommendations, which were presented to the government last week. In an interview on Wednesday this week, TRC Commissioner Hlengiwe Mkhize said she hoped the government would address the compensation of victims as a matter of urgency.
If people are assisted financially over time with counseling and guidance, it gives them an opportunity to improve their lot, so to say, in a variety of ways. But I mean, as I've said to you, that really we are there, I would say, as advocates for victims. At the end of the day, the government of the day has got to decide and has got to take responsibility.
How much money are we really talking about here?
You see, just looking at the statements, the projections, looking at what we're saying, I don't think we're talking about anything less than 3 billion. So we're really going to put it out there, and we just trust that the government will get sufficient support from the people of this country and international sources. But I suppose for victims, what will really be important is to see a government taking a stand and going all out, making sure that the necessary resources are available.
If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is the Reparation and Rehabilitation Committee, the Truth Commission, have done everything they can, and the ball is now in government's court.
Definitely, at this point in time as a commission, we really are saying we are carrying a burden of the victims' needs, and we have tabled everything before the government, and we're just hoping that they will pick up the urgency of the need and act appropriately.
Are you confident that you've done enough?
At this point in time, I'm confident that really, as a commission, we've looked at the database, we've looked at people's requests, we've looked at harm suffered, we've looked at it from different perspectives, and the policies which we have formulated captures the need. I would say we've really done our bit.
Our policy has 5 components to it, and we really would like people to see it within the context of those 5 components and not focus simply on the money, which I think is what has been happening in over the last 18 months. This is for people who can't wait for the whole process to go through Parliament and be approved, and they will receive immediate assistance. Those regulations are with the Department of Justice, and we're hoping that by November, December this year, we will be able to start assisting people in urgent need. This obviously is a type of pension payment, which we hope will enable people to live a dignified life and to meet the needs which they have expressed, whether these be medical or educational or housing, so that they themselves can decide what their needs are and use this money to assist them to meet those needs. The third component is symbolic reparation, and in that we're looking nationally at things like days of remembrance, services, national monuments, memorials, and then locally at perhaps changing street names or clinic names, local community services and those sorts of things. Included in symbolic reparation would also be, for instance, clearing people's criminal records, symbolic reburials of people who've disappeared, tombstones, headstones, and those sorts of things. The fourth component is community reparation, and we're looking there at not only the victims of gross human rights violations, but at the victims of apartheid as a whole. and we are placing on the agenda of a number of ministries like welfare, health, housing, education, the types of programs which we believe need to be put into place in order for communities to be rehabilitated. And then finally, the overall recommendations for institutional reform, which form part of the entire TRC's work, but obviously the Reparation Committee has input to give on those issues as well, particularly around the health sector, prisons, and education.
At a media conference in Cape Town on Thursday, the TRC finally announced its R&R policy publicly. They've come up with a figure of 3 billion rands based on a projection of 22,000 eligible victims.
So it's to make sure that those things do not happen again.
The process of truth and reconciliation in South Africa has amounted to more than just words.
East Londoner Chappie Beeling is disabled after being severely injured in an Uppler attack on his local pub in 1993. He's one of a handful of victims who hopes to get a lot more than 17,000 rands from the government.
I'm expecting to get 3 million from the government.
3 million rand, that's quite a lot of money. Why so much?
Because I'm 24 years old, I'm at the prime of my life, and my life is buggered. I had taken 4 AK-47 bullets. My hip was shattered. My arm is shot to pieces. My bowel was shot. And my groin was shot to pieces. They had cut half of my groin away. Half of my bum was cut away. And what have I got to look forward to in the future?
In Pretoria, Justice Minister Dalla Omar says the government is committed to delivering the goods to victims.
Amnesty looks after perpetrators of those terrible crimes we are talking about. And for us to make provision for amnesty without taking into account the concerns, the pain, the suffering, the hardships that victims have gone through would be completely unacceptable. So the TRC process is very much victim-orientated in that respect. And so the Human Rights Violations Committee identifies victims. So does the Amnesty Committee. But having identified victims, it is for the Reparation and Rehabilitation Committee to systematize the handling of all reparation and rehabilitation matters and make recommendations to government. It is very important because unless we address the concerns of victims, we will not be able to heal the wounds of the past. It will continue to fester, the wounds will continue to fester, and there will be no reconciliation in our country, and that will make nation building much more difficult. So addressing the concerns of victims is top priority for government.
So where's the money going to come from? How is government addressing that issue?
In the past, taxpayers' money was used to bomb other countries, neighboring countries, to build up a very powerful army that did all kinds of dubious things, to provide for the police, to build apartheid, to make apartheid work. Billions and billions were spent, which led to the kind of suffering which our people are enduring and have endured. My view is that the responsibility for ensuring that there is reparation and rehabilitation, and that we do take steps to restore the dignity of victims and indeed of communities and the nation as a whole, that is a responsibility of all South Africans. And I think that all South Africans must see it as their responsibility to make a contribution towards the nation building and reconciliation process. So the money which needs to be found to ensure that there is reasonable reparation, whatever form it takes, will have to come from the taxpayer. My hope is also, however, that the business community in particular in South Africa will also be generous and make contribution towards the President's Fund which will be responsible for reparation.
An unexpected source of revenue has been suggested by the Afrikaanse Handelsinstituut. They propose that the TRC and the government fund the reparation and rehabilitation process by dipping into the billions of rands in the South African Security Risk Insurance Fund, also known as the SASRIA Fund.
The SASRIA Fund is about 9 billion rand strong, and it was set up in the apartheid era to cover the risk of political riots and other insurance which could not be obtained in the market. I think that it was never expected that there would be a surplus in this fund, but the premiums that came in far exceeded whatever payments were made out, and now this huge pool of fund has accumulated. It's earning interest every year. It's growing.
We are desperately anxious that people will see that we do want for them to get something material, tangible. But I have to keep saying, there is no way in which you could ever compensate anyone adequately for pain suffered by being tortured, for anguish experienced because a loved one was killed. No amount of money could ever do it. But I am sure that some money can begin to be part of the ointment that you pour on wounds. And I hope, that this thing will be seen in that light.